First of all, I'd just like to thank all of you guys for coming. We've been working really hard on these presentations, and we're just super excited that all of you are interested in the things we have to say. So my name's Chelsie Harris. I've been going to the University of Alaska Southeast for the past 4 years studying art, and my main area of emphasis has been in ceramics with an interest in functional ceramic ware. Ceramic vessels have been a part of humankind's history for thousands and thousands of years, and because of this, I feel like it offers me a really easy opportunity to have frequent interactions with my viewer. I like the fact that my pieces can be incorporated into people's day-to-day lives. I enjoy working with clay because of how easily it can be manipulated. I can kind of sort of subconsciously express myself through clay without even realizing it. So these pieces here are kind of a little loose and wonky with some wavy lines, and I'm sure at that point when I was making them, I felt really laid back and relaxed about whatever was going on in my life. As opposed to some other pieces I might make that are a little bit more structured and rigid with sharper angles. I was probably stressed out about giving a source presentation at this point when I was making these. So these are just kind of some ideas that I'm working with, and I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about how I came around to making functional pottery and sort of some of the ideas and people that have inspired me along the way. So I grew up in the town of Warsaw, Indiana, in this little trailer park. And if any of you are from that part of the world or know people who are from that part of the world, you'll know that there's a lot of very traditional values that are still kind of enforced, especially family is this major social unit that is really important to people in the Midwest, I feel like. And when my parents first met and got married, I think they knew they knew right off the bat that they wanted to raise a family with those very traditional values. And they instilled a lot of these kind of old-fashioned traditions in me. It was sort of out of character for them, but when I was 10 years old, they sold their house and they moved us up to Kenai, Alaska, and they didn't have jobs lined up, and they didn't have a place for us to live, and everyone thought they'd gone crazy. But this was the first time that I heard this idea that sometimes in life it's okay to abandon logic to a certain extent and just follow your dreams. And I think believing that is important if you want to be an artist, because it's not always the most logical career path, and you really have to believe in what you're making and why you're making it. Another ideal that was instilled in me specifically by my mom, she's a really amazing lady. She raised 3 of us kids and for most of my childhood was working full-time, but she still managed to make these really elaborate meals for us every night. She'd come home from work and she'd have us sit down at dinner together and enjoy these meals. And she also would always take time to have me sit down and have a cup of tea with her out on her sun porch. And she taught me that it's important to make time in life to spend with people that you care about. And I think that I like to think my pieces are about these sort of dying social traditions and just encouraging them to happen more often, because in today's world it seems like we're all a little too busy to make time for that sort of thing. And this is sort of an idea that was developed out of the arts and crafts movement. Coming out of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of things were being machine-made and manufactured, and a lot of the characteristics were getting taken out of these objects that we were using every day. And William Morris was one of the leading thinkers and writers for this movement, and he felt like we were losing out on a certain quality of life by using things that no longer had a lot of personality to them. And so he was encouraging people to continue investing in the arts and the crafts because they really added a certain value to your day-to-day life. Of course, I didn't really start out as much of an artist prodigy. This is me at the age of 2, my first attempt at painting. And I managed to get more paint on me than I did on our 50-foot trailer. And that kind of set the tone for my whole childhood. I wasn't interested in the arts, and my parents, although they always supported me whenever I wanted to do, didn't really place a whole lot of value in handmade objects. And so I grew up more interested, and I love to write and tell stories, and I excelled in the maths and sciences throughout school. And that's what brought me here to Juneau. I thought I wanted to come here to be a marine biology student. And I showed up and took a few biology classes and realized that it wasn't for me. It was just too much information that I wasn't getting to engage, and I was having a hard time remembering everything. So I took a year and I did the Outdoor Skills and Leadership program offered here through the university, and that was a great year. I got a lot of new experiences under my belt, one of which was I took my very first ceramics class. And there aren't very many people that can walk into the studio and be good at throwing right off the bat. I certainly wasn't one of them. I struggled along that first semester. But the thing that really hooked me into it was a sense of community. You know, I'd grown up in this really traditional family environment, and since I'd left home, I didn't really have that in my life anymore. And when I came into the studio, I met this group of people that were always working together, firing kilns together, having big dinners together, and I felt like I'd kind of found my community again. And that's what really hooked me into the studio. And these are some pieces that I made that first year, pretty basic forms, but you can see that I have an interest in these really rough textures that's kind of continued throughout my work. I named this piece Primitive because it looks like something that I dug up out of the ground, I think, an artifact. After that first ceramics class, I moved to Homer, Alaska, which is a small little artsy town on the Kenai Peninsula. And I went there for a summer job, but ended up being unemployed and living in this kind of like boat junkyard with some friends. We were sort of squatting there. And we had a lot of time on our hands, and there was a lot of junk everywhere, but we viewed it as like materials and supplies, and we started kind of like inventing these projects for ourselves. One day we decided we wanted to build a raft, and at the end of the day when we put it in the water and it actually floated, we were pretty excited. But I recognized how rewarding it was to have an idea in my head and be able to brainstorm ways to make it happen and then see it actually manifest itself and function the way I had wanted it to. And it was really rewarding for me. So I decided to come back to UAS and enroll as a full-time art student so that I could get some more experiences like that. My first year as an art student, this fellow, Josh DeWeese, is a ceramic artist that came here as a visiting artist. And watching him was really inspirational to me because I'd never seen anyone be able to manipulate the clay the way he did when he was making his work, and also his final product just seemed to have so much life and so much movement to it. And that first year, I really idolized his work and basically just began stealing certain aspects of it and incorporating it into my own pieces. You can see here, obviously, that I'm referencing some characteristics from his piece. And I think this is kind of an important stage when you're learning how to make any art form, probably, is you look at another artist and something that they've accomplished, and you try and reach that and accomplish it as well. He also would make a lot of pieces in like separate pieces and build them together, and it gave them a lot of movement and kind of threw them off balance a little bit, and so I kind of started playing around with that idea a little bit. Lorna Meaden was another visiting artist we had here, and her ideas behind her work really hit home for me. Functional pottery, very ornate sets that were oriented around groups of people coming together and sharing food and drink. And, you know, coming from the family environment that I've been talking about, that was something that really made a lot of sense to me. So I started trying to put together sets, things that 2 or 3 people could enjoy together, you know, sit down and have a cup of tea with one another. And that was the point that I got really excited about making teapots, because I saw how much people enjoyed owning a handmade teapot and like sharing a cup of tea with a friend, and I wanted to make more pieces that people could use like that. Julia Galloway is another ceramic artist that I was looking at for a little while. Her pieces have a lot of volume to them, and I feel like they're very elegant, and that wasn't really anything I'd tried incorporating into my work yet. And so I started trying to put more volume in, really stretching the clay out and giving it more curves. And with pieces like this, I think it's important that they have the right amount of lift to them. Otherwise, they just kind of look like they're slumping down into the ground. And so you can see that I'm kind of trying to work on that whole concept a little bit. Martin Tagsteth was another visiting artist that we had here. And his work was kind of amazing to me because at that point I was really trying to get the weight out of a lot of my pots and get them as light as possible. And he just made these big, heavy, chunky pots that were meant to go into wood kilns. And so I wanted to kind of try and start making some things more like that. And I was making these lidded jars that were really thick in the bottom and heavy, so they felt really stable sitting down on the countertop. And kind of back to these basic cylindrical forms, I felt like they were nice canvases for different surface design, and I was also able to incorporate that texture that I've continued to be fascinated with. And Martin Tagseth is a really successful wood fire potter, and after he came as a visiting artist, I looked at a lot of his work and realized how unique the effects of wood firing can be. And wood firing is basically, it's a form of atmospheric firing where wood is the main source of fuel, and throughout the firing, the ash from the wood will fly back through the kiln, and it'll land on the pots, and when it reaches a certain temperature, the ash will melt out and create its own glaze. And just because of the whole process, there's a lot of destruction and carnage that comes out of wood firing, but you're also able to pull out some really unique pieces. They have a surface to them that you couldn't really get any other way. Also, when you pull pieces out of a wood kiln, they tell a little bit of a story. The cups tell you the path that the flame followed throughout the firing and where it chose to deposit the ash, and also the spots that it skipped over. And so when you're firing, you don't really know what's going on in there, but then you can open it up and the cups will kind of like reveal that whole process. And again, wood firing is this huge community event. Everyone's working hard together, and it's sometimes a 2 to 3 day process, and at the end it's always a big celebration. So once again, that common theme of like a sense of community in wood firing. So about 2 years into making work, I started hearing from my professor, Jeremy Kane, that I was only ever going to be as original as my source. So I started trying to think of other sources I could draw ideas from other than contemporary ceramic artists. And I also started thinking about why it was functional pottery that I was interested in. And I came back around to those situations I was telling you about with my family, where we would sit down and have meals together. And what I liked so much about those was the storytelling. And we would tell funny stories about things we did when we were younger, or something funny that happened throughout the day. And I always remember those dinners being very lighthearted. So I started incorporating these stories onto my pots, thinking that maybe they could either encourage or add to a conversation that was going on while people were using my pieces. This last winter, I moved out to this little cabin out in the woods, and it was always an experience that I had wanted to live in a place like this. And, it felt very independent moving out here, and it was kind of life-changing because I feel like my priorities were sort of reoriented. And so I tried to think of ways that I could use this experience to influence my work a little bit. And I started playing around with the idea of making pieces that could be used as tools for this sort of cabin lifestyle. So this is a water bucket I designed. My cabin's on a water catchment system, so if it gets below freezing here, I have to haul water up from the creek. And I thought I could maybe use this bucket for something like that. I was also cooking on a lot of cast iron. I didn't have an oven, so I was trying to figure out ways that I could bake on my stovetop, which didn't really work out that well. But I had these pieces around, and I think you can see in my work how they started to influence it. I started working with a darker clay body that was sort of referencing cast iron, and stopped glazing as much and left a rough surface because I again enjoyed that rougher texture. And when my grandma heard that I was living out this cabin, she gave me this small little antique cast iron teapot, and I realized that out of all of the handmade ceramic teapots that I had in my cabin, this was the one that I preferred using. So I tried to think of ways that I could incorporate the different characteristics of this cast iron teapot into my own work. And again, the great thing about clay is it can easily mimic other material, but at the same time it gives you the freedom to give your own twist to things. And you can really shape it and form it whatever way you want and add unique characteristics to a very basic form so that it's obvious that you've made it your own. And these are sort of the ideas that I'm still working with, trying to draw inspiration from this whole cabin lifestyle and making pieces that are sort of referencing cast iron and these teapots. I think, being here at UAS has given me a lot of great opportunities. I've gotten to travel to a lot of different places and meet a lot of different artists. And this last summer I received an undergraduate research grant through the university, and I used it to go to the Archie Bray Foundation for Ceramic Arts in Helena, Montana. And this place used to be an old brick manufacturing place, and it went under and got renovated into a place that ceramic artists could go and work. And so they built these studios, and they have all the facilities that they need for firing and developing their work. And I went there to do this wood firing workshop with these two gentlemen, Ted Adler and Dean Adams, very successful wood fire potters. And we spent a whole week firing this kiln, which is something that usually happens in a weekend. So I got a chance to learn a lot. We really took our time to analyze the whole process of loading the kiln and firing it, and then when we unloaded it, we took each pot out and really analyzed it and decided like which path the flame had taken around the piece and what was going on throughout the firing. And these are some pieces that I had in that kiln. They were buried down in the coal bed, so when I opened the kiln out, I literally had to dig them out of the ashes, and it created this very rough texture on them. But while I was there, probably the greatest thing that I took from that experience was getting to meet a lot of different people who had made ceramic art their career, and they were pursuing that successfully. And a lot of them were asking me, like, well, you're almost graduated, what are you going to do next? And I hadn't really thought about it a whole lot, and so I turned it around and asked them, what do you think I should do next? And a lot of them gave me the advice, that before going on to grad school, I should make sure that I'm confident in my skill level and also the ideas I have behind my work before I commit to another 3 years of school. So that's sort of where I'm at right now. This next semester is kind of going to be a bit of a limbo semester. I'm going to apply to a few artist residency programs and wait to hear back from them, and also just continue being in clay and making functional ceramics.